Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, but there's no actual coffee. Each episode, we interviewed an expert in the field of law enforcement analysis to share their career-defining stories and to get their insights on the world. Please join us on recognizing and learning from these brilliant minds as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 23 years of law enforcement analysis experience, with 33 years of overall of law enforcement experience. He is currently the vice president of the IALEIA Southwest Ontario chapter, and he is also the technology director for IACA. You can catch him on YouTube with his channel All About Analysis, and he is a former officer, instructor, consultant, and of course, my friend. Please welcome Manny Pedro. Manny, how we doing?
I'm good. How are you, Jason?
Oh, thank you so much. I am doing well. It's great to hear from you. I am glad that we can share our thoughts, your contributions to the profession, and talk a little bit about our shows. So I am looking forward to this interview.
So am I.
Let's start from the beginning then. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
I was in uniform for about 3 or 4 years. There was an opening in one of the police divisions where I was working at, and they were looking for an analyst, a crime analyst. I had no clue what crime analysis was, and I ended up taking the position. Being somewhat of a rookie, you just take the assignments you're given. I thought it was simply searching things or querying things or looking through mug shots and taking tips from officers and posting them on a bulletin board. That was essentially the scope of what I was doing as a crime analyst initially. I left that role and immediately got into the investigative field from that point. That was my initial introduction into crime analysis. And at that point, I thought, wow, got that under my belt. I've been a crime analyst, not having any understanding of what crime analysis really is.
Yeah. Approximately what year was this?
That would have been 1993, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so it's a very clerical duties that you had at the time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sort of clerical, but I dealt directly with police officers. I didn't even know there were civilian analysts. I simply just sort of compiled mugshots and created profile sheets with background information on bad guys, essentially. I took a unique turn in my career. I was in the major crime unit at one of the police divisions and essentially got myself in a bit of a jackpot in the division. And I ended up quickly getting transferred to recruiting, which took me off the road. And then ultimately dug myself deeper into some departmental issues. And I ended up going on restricted duties and being transferred to a different police station where I performed, I guess, more office duties. I wasn't on the road from that point. I went into the pawn squad, the divisional pawn squad, which is a property crime unit where I investigated secondhand stores and pawn shops for stolen property. And then at that point, the natural progression, because I worked in the crime analysis office, was to sort of assist with crime analysis. And it was at that point that I started to get exposed to what crime analysis really is. That's where I started getting sent on a number of crime analysis courses through the Alpha Group. And as you're well aware, Stephen Gottlieb's certification program. And I just found it really interesting. Steve just has a way of making math enjoyable. And I really found the direct connection with the sort of criminal investigative function that I was performing in the major crime unit, in the criminal investigation unit, and in the divisional pawn squad. So I started to apply these techniques. I was really interested in it, started to apply the techniques, and I started to create some sort of actionable analysis reports, recommendations, but directed them specifically to investigators I knew, the ones that might listen to me because of my relationship with them. On more than a few occasions, those products or those what I'll call predictive analysis actually netted in the arrest and seizure of thousands of dollars worth of recovered stolen property. So it was essentially where I started to get really excited about crime analysis. This stuff really works. It was a totally different approach to criminal investigation, approaching it from a data perspective rather than hustle and grind on the road and cultivating informants on the street. So it was a different approach. I got excited over it because it didn't require me to be on the road.
So you talked about you're kind of forced into this. It wasn't necessarily your plan. As you're transferring from it being more clerical to actual analysis, did you find the attraction more the data and databases, or using data to solve crimes or help solve crimes, I should say?
Yeah, it was more using the data and being able to leverage it to produce some actionable recommendations. And I participated in some of those activities, those investigative activities, while I was on restricted duties. Mm-hmm. So it was exciting. Just like when I first went into the major crime unit, it was exciting work. You get to go out there incognito and be able to see what other people see in the criminal networks. But in the crime analysis role, I'm able to actually look at data that's being collected. I mean, historically, police have been collecting a ton of data on all criminal reports. It's just nobody ever used them. And here I am being able to have access to all this data and now learning a new skill in sort of extracting that data and being able to leverage it to, you're probably aware of the we call them the Gottlieb rectangles, right? That was my introduction to using statistical methods to actually try to forecast or predict the next hit in a series. That was exciting because nobody was doing that. Nobody was doing that at the Toronto Police. And it was fun. It was fun to be able to predict something is going to take place, and it does. Looking at the data afterwards, the next one actually took place in the area that I prescribed and during the time period that that came up in the forecast. Now, again, in hindsight, that's very elementary techniques. There's been some further advances to heuristic analysis and spatial analysis, hotspot analysis, but that was the point that really opened the door for me, and I just found it exciting. I mean, since then I've been saying that these are exciting times, and they still are. I mean, right now, right up until today, these still are exciting times. There's so many things that we can get advancements on as far as getting insight into the criminal behavior and things that take place, things that sort of form a pattern that can be predicted.
So how did being an officer impact you as an analyst?
Well, I think in retrospect, had I not been a police officer, if I would have gotten into crime analysis without that background, I may have gone a different direction because I would have made certain assumptions on the policing culture, what actually takes place, and how information is actually collected. I've spoken to a lot of academics that use data, from open data sources that some agencies have released. Right, like Baltimore data, for instance. There's been a number of studies done with that data. But until you really understand how that data is being collected, it gives you a sense of, the quality and the context in which that data is being collected. I think if you don't understand that policing culture or how data is managed and collected or not collected, it's hard really to have a solid foundation for your recommendation or your analysis because you make a lot of assumptions. I'll give you one example. I attended a summer workshop at Michigan State University, myself and another analyst. When we attended, it was a bunch of academics, a bunch of other PhDs or PhD candidates, and I was essentially the dumbest person in the room. And they were getting into a whole discussion about analyzing trends in prostitution related offenses or even drug offenses. As the conversation was going, they were sort of going down a rabbit's hole, making certain assumptions as to the trends in drug crime or prostitution crime. And then I figured, okay, let me ask a question, right? I'm just quiet in the corner. And I thought, okay, this might be a stupid question, but I asked, I said, well, what data are you actually using to analyze drug crime or prostitution crime? And they said, well, we got this from this police agency. And everybody was okay with that, right? Because, you'd think, okay, they got it from a police agency, it must be good. But putting some context around how data is collected, I asked, I said, well, in policing, we essentially either collect data from reports being reported by the public, right, for crimes taking place, or if we arrest people for those crimes. There is a difference between certain crimes, meaning for drug offenses, really, we don't take reports for drug use or drug trafficking, right? Like police, the public doesn't phone and say, yeah, I want to report some drug dealing in this area.
Competition, yeah. I want to.
Yeah. Well, there is no real report for that except for information only. It's essentially a tip, right, from the public saying, if you have anybody investigating, maybe they should go to that area. So the only way we would have the capacity to track any kind of drug crimes would be based solely on enforcement, right? Mm-hmm. So only if we arrest somebody for a drug offense, whether that be for just straight possession of narcotics or trafficking or any kind of trafficking related offenses. That's really the only way to collect that data. And there was a gap in the understanding of how that data is being collected. Again, the public doesn't report it. So what are the implications? Well, let me tell you, being a police officer and having worked in a squad in the major crime unit, if you don't have the resources to sort of deal with local drug crimes, drug trafficking in a corner, we don't have the resources to police that, and we have maybe a centralized drug squad that deals with it, typically police managers will say, well, leave the drugs to the drug squad. So guess what? Nobody works that. Nobody works the drug trafficking or the local drug trafficking. And what happens is those numbers go down during those times. So it's only when we do the enforcement. The same thing with prostitution. Now, typically back in the day, we would, on the weekend, on a Friday, we would do what we call a hooker sweep, where we would have, undercover officers try to do a project in an area that's known for street prostitution and try to arrest as many of the street prostitutes. And the following day, what we would do is we would do a John sweep, where we would put our undercover female officers out there to pose as prostitutes. And then we would then arrest the Johns for offenses that they commit that's prostitution related. And we would do this a few times a year. Well, if you were to look at the numbers of prostitution crime, it's going to reflect the actual enforcement or sort of that campaign, that prostitution campaign.
There's a season to this. They would look like there was seasonality.
Well, exactly. And again, if you don't understand sort of the culture of how data is actually collected by police, you could, or there's a risk of misinterpreting that data as being seasonal. And you would think that seasons might have to do with it. And typically the data that gets produced publicly by police agencies lack that context. Right? Even to today, a lot of agencies still suffer from sort of that linkage blindness, right? Yeah. Because they collect a lot of data, but as they say, they're data rich, but information poor. And it's unfortunate. You might have the exception where some agencies or some analysts are able to sort of find their way into the web of data, and they may have the requisite skill set to extract that data and analyze it. But I think generally, even just based on the feedback that I've seen through discussion forums, that we're not as advanced as we could be.
Back to your story with that meeting then, was there anything that came out of that as when you questioned the data?
Yeah. So the point was they still didn't understand it. And I just didn't have the words to kind of explain it. So you end up giving up at some point. But myself and the other analysts, we had extensive discussions about that and saw the gap. That's when we actually realized, okay, well, people are actually doing analysis on this stuff. And we need to really classify our data based on enforcement or actual crime that's taking place out there, which makes it complete, right? If it's being reported by the public. I mean, the only other category would be for sex crimes or human trafficking, things like that, because those are severely underreported for various reasons. But, there are certain crimes that are underreported, but there are certain crimes like break-and-enters and things like that, or burglaries, that people tend to report almost maybe 95% of the time.
As you mentioned, you're taken off the street, quote unquote. Did you want to talk about what exactly happened and reason why you were taken off the street?
Yeah, I had some personal differences with the unit commander, and I was essentially kicked out of the major crime unit. And the reason they kicked me out was the official reason was that they were reducing the number of personnel in that unit. The odd thing about that was I believe, number 3 of 7 in seniority. Seniority meaning seniority in the unit, not number of years of service. And my partner was number 5. And we were both selected to be reduced, to leave the unit. But it all stems out of, I guess, me refusing to get intimidated by our internal affairs unit. And,
you're not a team player, Manny.
Well, no, it depends on what team you're talking about. Definitely a team player. But again, it's a bit of that disobedience and not towing the party line and not being willing to succumb to pressure. I had the opportunity to get transferred out permanently to the recruiting unit. Now, I don't know anybody that really wants to go to recruiting, especially with less than 10 years of policing service. But that was the only way I could get myself out permanently from that police division. So from under the unit commander that I had an issue with. So I took the opportunity and I went to the recruiting unit until they found out why I was removed from the major crime unit. And I eventually was removed from the recruiting office, and I requested any other division because they were going to send me back to the same division. I said, whoa, time out. I need to go to a different division. I took this position in order to have a permanent transfer, and I don't want to go back to that division. So I eventually wound up in what's referred to as one of the quieter divisions in the city. I guess I realized I had a drinking problem, and I ended up going to rehab several times, and I was on restricted duties. So I was essentially put in a unit that was off the road. And the pawn squad was that opening where, in my opinion, I think I flourished. I seized over $35,000 worth of property during a short period of time and laid a number of charges, developed and cultivated some informants in the property crime area, and enjoyed that. And ultimately, I ended up, because that office was in the same office as the crime analysis unit, I ended up being the backup analyst for the 2 analysts that were in that unit. And again, that was the point where, because I was working Monday to Friday and it was fairly laid back, anytime that there was an opportunity for training, they'd try to see who's available, and I was always available. So working Monday to Friday, right? I wasn't on shift. So I took it. I accepted the courses. And like I said, it was the crime analysis courses through the Alpha Group. And it was I just found it exciting. Right. I was able to apply it in the work that I was doing. I was able to test it out with, former colleagues in the investigative field and have them engage in the recommendations that I had made through my analysis. And it was fun because I found successes, and I measure successes as, if you predict something is going to happen and it does, that's pretty exciting stuff. It's almost like,
yes,
it felt like it was textbook, and it just made sense to me. And that really fueled my passion for leveraging data. And I had some computer science background from, back in my youth, which I never used. I never really used it, but one thing that I guess stuck in my head was the computer logic and developing the logic to extract data and to really find where data exists and to extract it. And because of that, I was able to develop a number of tools that we ended up using throughout the Toronto Police Service. And I started to learn by doing rather than sort of taking a course and then developing something. I developed things as I needed to.
Thank you for sharing that, Manny. I feel that you're an inspiration. You certainly have had several setbacks, but you kept progressing. You kept finding a way and really never giving up. I think you put on your hat of, I can keep on learning. I'll find my niche. I find it fascinating that during this time at police departments or police services, people got penalized and they put them in crime analysis. So even with officers gotten injured or whatever it is, if they were on limited duty, they somehow put them in crime analysis. And I don't know if that's still being done today, but it seems to me that the crime analysis or analysis in general is advanced so much that it's just not a member of like plugging anybody in there.
Well, not to say that crime analysis was the only penalty box, so to speak.
Sure.
We had at the Toronto Police, we had the Alternative Response Unit, which is essentially officers that sort of stay in the office and they take reports over the phone. There are other units that are non-enforcement, where you don't have to deal with the public. If you're not qualified to carry a firearm, then they'd have to find a position to essentially accommodate you to find a position inside an office environment, whether that's clerical duties. And the crime analysis unit just happens to be sort of one of those options where we're walking wounded or people that find themselves in restricted duties, whether through medical reasons or regulatory ones. I just happened to be dropped into the crime analysis unit. I didn't find my niche. I think it found me. I wound up in that unit and I just enjoyed it. Had I not gone into crime analysis, I'd still be loving plain clothes work. I'd still be loving being in the break and enter enforcement unit. I would still love drug crimes and investigating those. But I think, having been introduced to crime analysis, I really found the next level. I think the next level to policing. When they talk about intelligence-led policing, it's not necessarily centered on intelligence or the intelligence unit, but it's centered on an individual role analyzing the crime and formulating actionable intelligence, right? And making recommendations. So that's where I found myself. And I found myself performing tasks that I soon realized were not being done by anybody else. Believe me, I spent time when I finally got myself into that sort of crime analysis role in 99. I actually visited, as many police divisions to sort of job shadow crime analysts throughout the city. And just to give you a sense of how big this city is, we've got 17 police divisions that are essentially, each division is the size of a typical police department in many states. And we're the largest municipal police agency in the country. So we have 17 police divisions with at least 17 crime analysts. And I went to visit and job shadowed a number of them, right? The ones that everybody kind of said, oh, you got to go and see so-and-so and you got to go see so-and-so because they're really good. Sure enough, they were really good. A lot of them were good at data. A lot of them were, I would consider them sort of computer geeks. And I put myself in that, it's not, I wouldn't consider that self-deprecating. I mean, they were really good at their craft. They were able to get their data out and produce basic statistics and lists with some sense of automation without manually copying things from records management and dropping into an Excel spreadsheet and then formatting it, color coding it, and things like that. This was really the first stages of data efficiency that I was exposed to. And then I took that, layered on top of that, what I was learning from those crime analysis courses that I was exposed to, and kind of just did what made sense from an investigator's perspective, not from a statistical perspective or not from a sort of producing a final report, but, how is this going to assist in a criminal investigation? How can I give them something they don't already know, based on the patterns that I see? So that really was, I don't know whether I sound excited, but I'm definitely still excited about this because there's still definitely a long road ahead as far as learning goes.
There's always a danger with analysts of producing something that's already known or isn't going to be useful. Is it actionable? You have to make sure that you check all those boxes. And I think from your vantage point, coming from investigations, you had a great understanding of what the investigators already knew. And once you started bringing in all this knowledge, all this tools from your analyst training, you were able to basically wear both hats and really produce some useful products.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's where it becomes really exciting, is because I found myself in a position where I know the limitations of criminal investigations. I worked in the Divisional Criminal Investigation Bureau. We call it the CIB in the police division, during my early years. And I learned exactly how investigations are managed. And I learned, my opinion, I learned from the best, maybe not the most personable senior investigators, but definitely elite as far as criminal investigations. And one of the things that I learned was that, we typically don't get information after the first few days in a criminal investigation. And we end up, we call it the callback sheets. We used to have these clipboards with all the cases that were assigned. And essentially, we would do a callback on witnesses and victims to see if they have any new information. So I realized that was a futile exercise for the most part. And I'd say a large amount of time is spent on those callbacks that are fruitless, but we still have to do it. We need to have that tickler to see if we can shake the tree and see if anything will come out. But one of the things that I found with crime analysis is that I can actually look back and find linkages in data, find patterns of behavior as far as, let's say, for instance, we call it MO, right? Modus operandi, the method of operation, how the crime is committed. Well, if we could look back and actually categorize or classify our occurrences by MO, then we can look back and see what other cases in the past have been reported that fit that same MO. And now imagine this, finding ones that match the MO, maybe during the same time period, or maybe, within the same geographic area. And it may be, months or years previous, but there are certain things that kind of fit a certain pattern. And imagine if somebody was actually arrested for any of those. Now we've got a starting point. Now we've got a bit of a lead as to somebody that has a history of engaging in this type of behavior in the same manner. So we call that similar fact evidence. They've done this before. And then now the next step is, now let's find everybody with the same type of history. Now you've got offender typology that you can look at. Where can you go next? And one of the things I discovered is all these people have a history of addresses. So now I'm able to look back and go, well, if I were to establish a mobility pattern for each particular type of offender, so imagine this, I've got a bunch of break and enter offenders that match the MO, and now I've got this set, and I look at their mobility patterns, like their previous addresses in the past 10, 15, 20 years. And if I were to map that, I'm going to develop some patterns, any overlaps in all these offenders. And now, based on rational choice theory and crime pattern theories, I can now see that while they could have had the opportunity to have committed some of these offenses in the area. So now I've got sort of my usual suspects in a specific geographic area. So being able to do that as an analyst, knowing that as a criminal investigator, there would be no way for me to actually get to that point. There really isn't.
Yeah.
It's not set up that way. Records management systems aren't set up to be able to answer these types of very specific inquiries. And that's what crime analysis has taught me. It's taught me to ask questions. And I've always said that a good analyst can come up with an answer, but exceptional analysts tend to find a better question. So I'm always trying to cultivate a better question. We as analysts, one thing we develop over our years of experience is identifying what the problem really is. If you look at the data enough, or if you examine, a series of incidents, we're great at identifying patterns. And we've got certain tools that allow us to test to see if those patterns are actually significant. So that's the stuff that gets really exciting. I always get excited about being able to do things that not everybody does.
I had Stephen Beltz on the show a couple weeks ago, and he's from the NICB. We had a discussion about analysts and how sometimes they're too tied to technology and they're not thinking like problem solvers, or they're not thinking like an investigator.
As analysts, we need to kind of slow down a little bit. And I've found this with a number of analysts that I've worked with through my consulting, is whenever a request comes in, whether it's an investigative request or whether it's a statistical request, the initial response is, okay, I'll get that. And all of a sudden they start typing away at their keyboard. And that's the point where we stop and we break it down. We break down what the ask is. We break down what the question is, what the investigative question is. In my time in the sex crimes unit, I kind of developed a bit of a process for me, almost like an intake process. I referred to it while I was there as a mini case consultation. So whenever I'd get a request from an investigator or an investigative team, I'd have them come in and I'd schedule. So why don't you bring all the files? Let's have a mini case consultation. And I essentially try to establish what we know in five areas of either a crime series or a pattern that they've identified. And essentially that's the space, time, behavior, victimology, and offender profile, like all those five things. And not that investigators don't do this. They do this as a course of their investigation, except they don't break it down that way. They know the information, but they never break it down that way. And it's hard to identify patterns until you break these things down. That process really helped me to draw out what the investigators actually know. At the end of it, I simply ask them, or I make it a goal of the mini case consultation to identify A, what we know, B, what we don't know, and C, what is it that we really need to know? And that allows me to focus my interrogation of the data, because I need to satisfy what we really need to know to get to the next stage of the investigation. And that's really dependent on the investigators themselves. So working hand in hand with your investigative team is key. I just find that at least the analysts that I've dealt with, I'm not going to say as bad as rarely, but it's not often that they immerse themselves in the investigation and actually make themselves part of the team. It's not likely that the investigators are going to openly invite you to it, but you need to inject yourself in. And the only way to do that is to establish credibility, is to be able to provide them with information they don't already know. It's easy to run a query and provide them with information that they could eventually find out, all the occurrences that match certain things. Okay, they can find that out. What you need to do as an analyst is be able to provide them with something that's going to get them to the next stage, something that's going to provide them with enough information to put into what we call an ITO, or an information to obtain a search warrant to get to the next stage. And we need analysts to make recommendations as to what they need to do, whether that's close surveillance or maybe getting a search warrant or a production order for call detail records, for instance. That needs to come from the analyst. If your investigators or your frontline officers are coming to you telling you they've identified a pattern, you've missed the boat, because you're the one that's supposed to look at the data and identify this stuff. I found myself in that position where officers, have come up to me identifying a pattern or a potential series that I ought to have identified. And sometimes you got to kick yourself, right?
Yes.
Although I've had a number of successes in the crime analysis field, I've also had a number of embarrassing moments, where I overextended myself. But I don't regret it one bit. It's embarrassing, but I don't regret it one bit. I remember, I'm not quite sure which instructor said this, but, as analysts, we need to go out on a limb because that's where the fruit is. Sometimes that limb is going to break, right? But we need to go and find the gaps in the data and we need to fill it.
Good. All right. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I do want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about IALEIA, talk about IACA, and talk about your idea for a TV show and, of course, your YouTube channel. This is Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. LeAnn Perry. I have a public service announcement. Don't get so set in your way of thinking that you don't allow yourself the flexibility to grow in your thoughts. Be willing to consider other people's viewpoints and critically think through them. Changing your mind is not the end of the world. Keep your mind open enough so that it's at least a possibility.
Hey, this is Steve Beltz, and I've got a pet peeve I want to share with you folks. You know, we all have the cell phone driving issue, but I kind of take it down more to the local level here. It's not dangerous, but extremely annoying. I'm having to make my way through airports now again, and you get that person in front of you that's either reading something off their cell phone or talking to somebody on their cell phone, and you're trying to get to your gate, and you don't realize that people are backing up behind them, just like as if they were driving a car. Get off your cell phones or pull over to the curb with your cell phone in the airport and get it out of the way. So appreciate it. Thanks.
Welcome back, Manny. Now, I want to get into your analyst badge story. But before I get into that, I want to remind our audience that the second Thursday of every month, Mindy publishes quick tips on our YouTube channel. And these are animated tips that are funny and insightful, and you can learn something from. So please check those out. That's the second Thursday of every month. So for the analyst badge story, Manny, what would you consider your career-defining case or project?
Well, there's a couple of categories to that. My career-defining story has nothing to do with analysis, but has to do everything with cultivating confidential informants. But the ones related to crime analysis is essentially called the Map Guy series. One of the things that was exciting about this was I was able to apply a number of different techniques on my Batman utility belt to essentially, have a shotgun approach and apply geographic profiling analysis and the predictive type of analysis, hotspot analysis, to end up with a recommendation that netted some successes fairly quickly. So this was a series of sex crimes, classified as sex crimes. It was the sex crimes unit that was assigned to investigate this. And for about a 1-year period, they had a series of incidents where they had a male suspect driving around in an SUV or a truck in certain areas throughout the city and luring preteen girls, girls that are 11, 12, 13 years, school-age kids, during the time when they're either walking to school in the morning or at noon during lunch period. And throughout the year, this was taking place. There was multiple investigative units across the city that were investigating this particular series of incidents. And I had recently been certified as a geographic profiling analyst, and this was one of those things that was really exciting. Although I was told I'm not to apply any of these techniques to sex offenses, it was just hard not to. I had the data and I applied the techniques and the principles behind it, tried to follow as many of the rules to develop a peak profile. And it ended up resulting in me identifying 2 peak profiles throughout the city. As far as the hunting area throughout the city, just to give you a sense of the magnitude, it's just under about 300 square kilometers of the city. That was the hunting area. That's where throughout the year, the incidents were taking place in that area. And just to compare it to how big the city is about 635 square kilometers. So it's just under half the size of the city. To be able to produce and say, yeah, it's going to happen in that 300 square kilometer area.
That's not very helpful.
Yeah, exactly. That's like saying, if I throw a rock at a lake, I can guarantee with a high degree of probability that rock is going to hit water. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's essentially what that was. But we were able to identify the peak profile. And now what does that tell me? Well, I ended up consulting with the geographic profiler that was the instructor during my certification process, and he worked for the Ontario Provincial Police. I contacted him to consult with him, and he basically suggested to me that because my offender seems to be highly mobile, that it's not likely that I would identify, those peak profiles would identify his residence or his work, but rather where he begins his local hunt. So that was, okay, that's good. So we can't identify his residence, but I could identify, where he's going to begin his local hunt. Now I was able to kind of switch, change my hats as a crime analyst now, doing some forecasting and predictive type of analysis, using the stuff that I learned from Steve Gottlieb, and apply those same principles and actually prescribe a deployment strategy. So let me just backtrack a little bit. The investigators actually came up to me on a Thursday, and this is after it's been a year that this series has been going on. They came up to me and they said, well, I understand you guys do some map geographic profiling or whatever they called it. And I said, well, yeah, I can help you with that. And they gave me all the files. I had a sort of mini case consultation with them and took the files home with me, sort of broke it down and read through all the occurrences. A couple of interesting things came out. There was over 20 occurrences in this series. And it was funny that all the vehicles were described probably 8 different ways. It was described as an orange van, a blue SUV, a silver minivan, and there were over 8 different descriptions. So it's like, okay, how are we establishing that this is a series? And then we had a composite of the suspect. And then they said the closest we got to a license plate was a partially covered license plate, and it looked like a personalized license plate that said U2, like it ended with the letter U as in uniform and the number 2. So that's all we had to go on. And so as I got the files at home and I'm reviewing them, I got a friend of mine that's sort of asking me, so what are you up to? I'm really mulling this whole idea of these different vehicle descriptions. And then he says to me, a buddy of mine just got a 2006 Ford Freestar. He got it in this color scheme that it's like if you got 10 people around this Ford Aerostar, in sunlight, we'd all describe this as a different color. Like it just changes color, depends on what angle you're looking at it. And I thought, that's interesting. Well, that's a possibility because it could be the same vehicle, but just people's perspectives, based on the color scheme. So, there I go, 2006 Ford Freestar. So I had the briefing scheduled for the following Tuesday. So they gave me the file on Thursday. I had a briefing at 8:30 in the morning with multiple investigative teams from 2 different divisions and the sex crimes unit. Now, typically these briefings would go maybe about 10 minutes. I give them my findings and that would be it, right? Give them my findings, give them my recommendation, deployment strategies. But they started asking questions. They all doubted, how did I come up with all this stuff? So I had to actually take them through the process that I engaged in to come up with those conclusions. And I even suggested that it's possible that, this might be a Ford Freestar that we're looking at simply because of the color scheme, because the 2006 Ford Freestar comes in this color scheme. And the thing that really validated my briefing was one of the officers or one of the investigators there actually agreed with me. He says, I know exactly the paint color. And he suggested that if all of us here were to describe that vehicle, we're going to come up with 30 different descriptions as far as the color. It's just a fascinating color. So I suggested that they deploy, because they've got limited resources. It's a huge city. I limited it to 5 city streets. It was a very small area in the city. And I said, if you've got limited resources, I'm going to recommend that over the next 4 weeks, on a Tuesday and a Wednesday over the next 4 weeks, that you deploy your surveillance teams, your mobile surveillance teams, in this very small pocket of the city. And it turned out to be one of the peak profiles. And I said, the time analysis, or the heuristic analysis, suggests that if you're there between 10:30 in the morning and 1:30 in the afternoon, just those 2 days a week, but for a 4-week period, you're likely to come across your guy who you're looking for. And I'm going to suggest to you that you keep an eye out for a Ford Freestar.
You said like 10 a.m. to 1 p.m.?
10:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m.
But aren't the kids in school then?
Yes. Yes, they are. But we had also reports of the other reports that I actually pulled out were suspicious vehicles in the area. And one of the things that came out was a white van that was in these areas during that time period. So using that, the standard deviation, and again, not straight, but using an heuristic analysis rather than just straight standard deviation, we were able to narrow it down from 10:30 to 1:30. So that took about 90 minutes to do the briefing. So I head back to the office, right, downtown Toronto. As I'm typing my briefing notes to give to the investigators, a matter of formality, I get a phone call. It was shortly after 11 o'clock from the lead investigator, all excited, saying, Manny, they pinched the guy. I'm heading over to 43 Division right now, and I'm asking all sorts of questions where she couldn't give me any answers.
Oh, wow.
She said, I don't know. And I said, where did they arrest them? I'm not sure. And being impatient, I contacted our communications bureau and I had them roll back the tapes and tell me what happened, where the arrest was, and to sort of listen to the radio
play-by-play.
Yes, exactly. And as it turns out, right at the center of where I had told the investigators to deploy is where they initially encountered the vehicle. And it was funny because the communication was something that there were multiple surveillance teams, and the first surveillance team member said, I've got a minivan coming your way. It's an orange minivan. And then somebody else chimed in and said, I don't know, there's a blue minivan. So it's like, it fit the pattern, right? And again, I just suggested this because it's a possibility. As it turns out, it was a 2006 Ford Freestar with that exact color scheme. And the license plate it didn't actually end in U2. It was actually 2U. Again, for privacy reasons, I'm not going to tell you what the personalized plate was, but it matched. Sure. It actually matched what this individual did as a living. It was exciting. They had a bit of a chase. And when this person was arrested, person's pants were, rolled down to the knees. He had the map book. Although the composite drawing was from a 12-year-old's recollection, this was probably about 90 to 95% accurate as to what this person actually looked like. That is some exciting stuff. Now think about it. 33 minutes after I prescribed that they be in that area, within 33 minutes, they found the guy.
That's fantastic.
Right? And it solidified or it validated the kind of values that analysis brings to criminal investigation.
That's great.
It was funny. I tell you that some of the techniques were from things I've learned from Steve Gottlieb. And it was funny because as a result of that investigation, we actually received a Excellence in Policing award from the chief. And during the award ceremonies, it was funny because Steve Gottlieb was conducting training that week, and he always gives me a call whenever he's in town. So I asked him, I said, do you want to attend the award ceremony? I think it'd just be appropriate that you be there to actually sort of validate the things that you're teaching. And it was great. It essentially put crime analysis on the map.
Nice. So in terms of geographic profiling, they're always worried about where folks live, work, and play. And then you talked about hunting grounds. You talked about certain targets. We're talking about school-age children. You mentioned the 5 potential target areas to go to. Are they right by schools?
Yes, they were. And that was definitely his target profile. And I believe there's no problem in me telling you this, but he was a caterer, right? He was, as we found out after the fact, those areas across the city were in very close proximity to his suppliers for food. So going back, doing the investigation, a follow-up investigation after, because my question was, why was he in those areas? Like, what was his anchor in that area? And the anchor was the places where he would get his supplies from to do the catering. It was specific to areas where there were schools. Because part of the analysis as well was I did a chronograph, right? Like a walking distance, a 5 to 10 minute walking distance around all the schools in the area, and essentially trying to create an irregular Venn diagram to see those areas that overlap to sort of narrow down the focus for our investigators. And again, there were multiple other other techniques that were used to sort of layer and score certain areas throughout the city. Things that aren't necessarily things that I learned, but just things that made sense to me that the offender might be engaged in as far as his mobility patterns.
That's a great story. Good job. I do want to move on to a couple other topics as we finish up this interview. So let's talk about IALEIA. As mentioned, you're the vice president of the Southwest Ontario chapter. Just give a little insight about the work that you're doing, what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish with this position.
Well, I think what I was trying to accomplish initially has been accomplished. Initially, prior to me getting involved in the board, was the chapter would have their quarterly meetings, and it would be a typical roundtable meeting where all the members would talk about things that they typically would email each other, would send out bulletins or trends, things that are taking place in their area. I just found a huge gap where we could really benefit from being together in person. My initial goal when I was talking to the president was I want to change the way we do things. I want it to be more of a training session. So when we're getting together quarterly, I want to make sure that everybody learns something or takes something home with them that they are going to benefit from. And I got that principle from attending IACA conferences, because I just found that every time I would attend an IACA conference, I'd be learning a ton of stuff that I can actually bring home and apply in my day-to-day activities. So I wanted to do the same thing to benefit our membership in IALEIA. So we started to conduct these training sessions. And our inaugural training session, we called it our 24/7 workshop. We gathered 24 different presentations having to do with intelligence analysis, and all the presenters would have 7 minutes to present, and it would be rapid fire.
Speed dating.
Exactly. And we would have 24 of these, and we had a clock projected on a wall, so you know exactly when it's coming up, and we would actually cut them off at the 7-minute mark and go to the next one. And it was fast. And what we did was we gave everybody that attended a scorecard, all the sessions, and essentially a survey with their number on it. And they would essentially, as the presentations were there, we would ask them questions like for each one, ask them how interested they are in this particular subject or topic, and the likelihood of them using that in their current role. The last question was, would you like this to be included? And they would be scoring that, from 1 to 5. So we collected all that information at the end of it, and we used that as the basis for our future training. So all the workshop sessions that we offered after that, our quarterly workshops, were based strictly on what the membership found valuable and what they found they needed the most.
Interesting. So basically, you created a survey through a series of 7-minute presentations.
Exactly. And it was fast, right? It didn't give you enough time to get bored.
Sure. Did you find that you coming from crime analysis, that the idea of intelligence analysts was vastly different, or were you surprised at the overlaps in terms of what most people wanted?
Well, I think there was there's a misunderstanding. There's a big gap as far as what crime analysis and intelligence analysts do, and I think we all do a certain degree of both disciplines, because I don't think you can conduct your analysis without supplementing it with any type of intelligence technique. Because data is data, whether it's from your RMS or through open source or through other means. We need to engage in that field. That's our battleground, and data is our currency. That's the currency we trade in.
Sure.
So people kind of limiting themselves to, that's I'm a crime analyst, I don't do that, or I'm an intelligence analyst, I don't do that. I think one of the things that I appreciate about the IACA is I find the attendees that I speak to are more candid about what they don't know. Like they'll ask the most genuine questions. Well, how do I do, and again, the simplest things to some of the senior analysts or the experienced analysts, but they're able to ask that question because they know they're going to get the answer. Whereas I think in the sort of intelligence analysis field, I think you'd be hard pressed to find an intelligence analyst that will actually be as candid about the things they don't know or understand. I just find that, again, that's just an opinion or observation on my part. As a criminal investigator, I kind of have that bit of a censor as to sort of like a candid censor to see if somebody's being candid or somebody's being deliberately misleading. One unit commander told me that, people don't know how stupid you are until you tell them. And some people just, will open their mouth, about things they don't understand. But intelligence analysts that I deal with, not to diminish what they do or their role, but I think we could improve as crime and intelligence analysts. I think we could vastly improve our skills and knowledge if we're just willing to say, I don't know, rather than coming up with an answer. Let's find out. That's exactly what we did with our 24/7. Because if you ask everybody in a survey, they'll tell you they know this stuff. But the survey actually tells us the evidence, right? Which is, this is what's valuable to them. This is what they need. This is what they want to find out more about, right? So I think the more people identify what it is that they don't know, gives us greater opportunities to fill that gap. And I think these both associations, both IALEIA and IACA, are the biggest contributor to that knowledge.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I think that it's one where I want to guess that because of crime analysis stemming from the idea of bean counting and being a part of stats and being part of casework that can be made very public, that there is a more openness, or there's at least not a fear that you can talk about it freely. Whereas historically speaking, you talk about intelligence, there's always a secretive component to the whole task and purpose. So I wonder if that feeds into this notion of not showing your cards as much on the intelligence analysis side.
I think you're right. I think that's a major cause of it, because of that sort of secretiveness of intelligence analysis. But analysts don't have to divulge the sensitive information to talk about techniques. Right? The techniques and software tools and ways of doing this is publicly open. I mean, now in this age of the internet, information is free and it's out there. These techniques are out there. It's just a matter of now applying it to our tradecraft, right? Being able to apply those techniques. And I think one of my episodes on my channel is having a couple of experts answer a question that I found on the discussion forums. And we addressed that on that particular episode. It doesn't surprise me that that's my number 3 video as far as YouTube views. There's a need for these techniques for analysts. They've got a lot of questions and they may not understand how to pose the question, but I think we as experienced analysts we have a duty to actually share our knowledge. That's the only way we're going to grow, is to be able to do that. And that's, quite frankly, that's what keeps this role exciting for me.
All right. Well, I'd love to talk about that more, but I do want to move on to IACA. You are the technology director for IACA. And for maybe some of folks listening to this podcast, they think I buried the lead and I should have talked about this beginning very first and foremost with you. But one of the things that you're responsible for as a technology director is the IACA website. And there's some issues with the website that I want to make sure that we talk about, and then talk a little bit about how we got there and maybe some aspects into how we move forward.
Let's give some context around this discussion about the IACA website. And you're correct. As technology director for the IACA, my responsibility, or the committee's mission, is to provide a robust platform, right? And that being the website. And the website itself has various components in it, one of which is the membership component, the certification component, the training component, and the discussion forums. I'm just using at a very high level. There's definitely other areas. So when I took over this role in, I believe it was January 2019, this was the time when the association was about to launch the current website that's available now. That back then, that was the new thing. and I took on the role. I thought, okay, well, I've got some technology knowledge as far as development and managing a project. So I'll take that on. Yeah, no problem. I soon found out that under the hood, there was a lot of gaps. And again, the gaps are surrounding the actual features and functionality of the website. Let's say if you were to purchase a car and you didn't know what kind of car you wanted, and all you said was, I want to make sure I have an SUV or something.
Where you can't identify the color.
Right. So yeah, exactly. So I want something that looks like an SUV. I want these huge size tires, and I want it to be able to be used off-road. Let's say those are your three requirements. Just imagine if the manufacturer just had those requirements. Imagine the very minimum SUV you would get. You would likely get a lot of missing things that you would like or that you assume are part of an SUV. You'd make certain assumptions as to what an SUV would be like. But because we didn't specify those requirements, the vendor might be inclined to just produce something that meets those requirements. I'm hoping you can see the illustration here. And I think the website that we wound up with back in January or February or March of 2019 was sort of at least close to what was asked for. Unfortunately, the discussion forums was one of the major issues because it wasn't a net new offering or a feature. It was actually a replacement to an existing listserv. So there was an existing mechanism in place for communications between members. And this discussion forum was the decided platform to replace the listserv. Now, there was some discussion, became a bit of a controversy in the beginning because it was suggested that maybe we use both platforms, the listserv and the discussion forum. The problem with that is you would never find the right time to actually switch over. Right? In any project that you're ever going to be involved in, at some point in time, you have to rip the Band-Aid. There's going to be some pain and there's going to be some growing pains, and it may not satisfy everybody's needs. But, we were hoping that once we did that, requirements would stabilize, right? We would identify exactly what the gaps are, what we're missing, and we did. To a certain degree, through use and recommendations from various members, we made certain changes, actually forced the developers to develop those features in a way that's usable for our members.
And this is directly to the forums, or is this just the website overall?
What I'm speaking about is directly about the forums because that's where we got the most I'll just say their feedback. Right.
Yeah. Just real quick, though, just for those that don't know, listserv is essentially an email service. The forum is postings that go on a website that you can be notified via email, but that's just to know the differences between a listserv and a forum. And I do have to take some ownership over the hubbub because I was one of the ones that sent out an email, one of the last emails on the listserv, wanting to give it a nice send off, and it turned into quite a discussion there as it were ending. But anyway, all that being said, can you continue, Manny, please?
Yeah. So, and again, what I'm referring to is specific to the forums, but it essentially applied to everything else. Because what I realized was the website was simply a web presence. It didn't make things any more efficient for us. It was simply a replacement of the old one, but sort of with a different look, with a more modern, up-to-date look. But as far as functionalities, it really lacked the features that we needed, A, to manage membership and the process, B, to assist in managing the certification process, C, providing a platform for selecting training programs, whether that's in person or online training programs that we have, and event management, which is if we want to register for an event, whether that be
conference, training.
Exactly. Annual conference, training, or the international symposium, we should be able to do that within our site. That was part of the requirements of the web development is quote unquote event management module. So, and that wasn't there. That just was not there, or at least it wasn't turned on. And then the discussion forum. The difference with the rest of it is those first four are net new developments. They're net new. They didn't replace anything. that we currently had in the old website. It was only the 4 discussion forums that was actually a replacement. So if we were to look at the IACA as a law enforcement agency or a government agency, the discussion forums would be classified as a mission critical application because we have one that's running on the listserv and we needed to replace that. So whatever we provided needed to satisfy the requirements for the exchange of ideas and communication and notifications and being able to exchange information between members. So that's what makes the discussion forum a little more unique and, again, mission critical. So that became a big focus. And we would make sure that the website becomes the hub of communication, the hub of information. If you're going to register for an event or register for training or partake in training, it would be within the website platform. If you're going to be signing up for a membership or renewing your membership, that shouldn't be done manually. That should be done within the website itself. And the certification, if you're going to enter as a candidate into the certification program, then we have to manage the entire thing within the website itself. So that was the concept. That's where I was going to come in and sort of direct that work to make sure we unify everything into one central platform wherever we can. The problem with that is when you have a Frankenstein of an application where, you've got Band-Aid solutions left and right, you've got WordPress plugins to fill the gaps. At some point in time, you'll look and you'll see that every little problem is solved with a plugin, not as an overall solution, but as a Band-Aid. So now we're creating a platform that is a mishmash of little widgets here and there. And you were part of a focus group that the IACA engaged in order to develop its strategic plans over the next 3 to 5 years. And part of that is making sure that we address all the issues and prioritize them and come up with solutions. And one of the options I essentially am recommending is either we take what we've got, move it into a platform where we have full control, and then allow us to fix every problem one at a time and come up with a solution, not a Band-Aid. Now, the implications of that is cost, time and cost, because I can't really say it's going to take us 6 weeks to do it. There's no way I could pull that out of a hat. So the other option would be starting from scratch. If we were to start from scratch, what would the implications be and what would the platform look like and who essentially would be developing that and in what platform? So those are the kinds of things that we're currently looking at. And it's promising. But again, I'm not an elected official here. I've been appointed to my role. I can only make recommendations to the board.
You're a consultant.
Essentially that's what I'm doing. But I think we've got a number of options available to us, and it's just now a matter of where we end up. When we get to that point where we're able to discuss the details of those solutions, I'm going to say I'll assess this at a 95% confident that it's going to pass the Jason Elder sniff test. Because I think I understand where you're coming from with a lot of your concerns, and I think it's going to meet at the I'm 95% confident that our solutions that we end up adopting is going to satisfy the majority, the high majority of the concerns.
Where the real problem is you talked about these widgets that are fixing some issues. Those widgets you and your unit don't necessarily have control over. And so what you have to rely on is the website provider to service those widgets. And the customer service has just not been what we had expected. We were requesting stuff, they're not doing it. And so that's where we're at this impasse of what you're talking about. Do I have it correct?
Yeah, I think for the most part, you have it correct. And I want to add to that. I think we're in a great position now, a position we weren't in January of 2019. I think we're in a great position now to actually define what our requirements are. And as a consultant myself and a developer, the key things for the customer is defining what the requirements are. And the problem is, and this, I think this happens with every police agency, the vendor will say, what do you guys want? And then, typically agencies will say, well, what do you have to offer? And then all of a sudden, the vendor's eyes kind of open wide and they get really excited, rubbing their hands together and saying, boy, do I got a product for you. And then they
off the shelf.
Exactly. They start showing you all the DVDs, all their collateral material that make you feel like, oh boy, I am going to be the future of policing. And what happens, more often than not is you'll get the solution and it doesn't meet your requirements simply because there were no actual requirements. Well, I think we're in a good position as the IACA to specify the requirements. I'm talking specifically about those modules that I'm talking about. Membership module. We've worked together with the membership committee to identify the exact process flow. So we know the exact requirement right down to when is the email going to get sent out, who's going to receive what email, and what response are we going to get, and how are we going to get notified so that things don't fall through the cracks. We did the exact same thing with the certification process. Working with the certification committee, they did a fantastic job in clearly identifying what they want the flow to be. And the flow makes sense. It allows the application itself to actually be a feature to manage the certification process. And the event management. Now, the event management component, right now, it's actually working. But because of these failings, we have external service providers that provide us that registration piece to perform that role. And then the forum part, again, we've got a bit of a broken platform. Well, no, I'm not going to say it's broken, but it's definitely limping. Our current platform is limping in some areas. And I'm specifically talking about notifications and certain delays. And then there's other things that are process driven. These are processes or policies that have been set in place by the executive board. Whether it's this executive board or prior administrations, those policies are in place. And all we, as technology director, I simply have to look at those policies and make sure we provide a platform that addresses those specific policies. And I'm specifically talking about the moderation piece. Until that policy changes, and on the technology side, we have a platform that allows us the flexibility to the things that you may have previously suggested. That's where we find the middle ground. So until those are policy changes. So that's not in the technology, that's in the policy.
All right. Hey, if you're interested in helping out with this, if you have some experience with websites and whatnot, and you want to help out the IACA, I am sure Manny can find some places where you can help with this. So please reach out to Manny if you're interested.
Yeah, and any feedback on our website, we've sort of modified the communication piece from members. So if you have something directed to a particular committee, whether that's the board or a specific committee or just a general question about the IACA, in our website under the Contact Us, you get to select who that message is directed to. So if you've got a complaint or idea or suggestion, or you identify a broken link, anything to do with the website or the forums, just direct your Contact Us form or message to the technology committee. And that will go directly to me. And one of our team members, if not myself, will try to communicate with you or resolve the issue. And that applies to all the other committees. So those are the things that I think will open up the communication between members and the respective committees.
All right. Very good, Manny. All right. Let's finish up. I want to move on to personal interest because I want you to talk about you creating a TV show. We talked about the penalty box earlier in this interview, and you were a creative consultant on a TV show idea that's based on your time in the quote unquote penalty box.
Yeah, absolutely. Back in my time in the Crime Information Analysis Unit, one of my colleagues, a detective, was approached by a friend of his who's a writer. He's a television broadcasting writer, asking him for some ideas. And he essentially referred him to me. So we arranged the meeting. That discussion was supposed to be a little quick half-hour meeting, turned out to be a 4-hour lunch. And we both got excited because in telling him my story, we both kind of got excited. I was able to reminisce about the good old days, and he was able to open up to the reality of policing from my perspective anyway. And it was totally different from what you see in the typical television show. And we started to flush out some ideas and forged a partnership, myself and two creative writers, writers for the television industry. And we formed a partnership, ended up developing a pitch for one of the major broadcasters in Canada, one of the big three. It was actually funny because, we went into this meeting. I have no clue. I've never dealt with executives in the television broadcast industry. And I'm asking them, how is this going to go? And he basically says, well, listen, I'm going to talk about everything. And if I get into your area, I'll just put it off to you. And, to sort of fill in the blanks. So I go, okay, I can do that. Sure. I'll follow your lead. So we get in there, we get introduced to the two executives. And he basically introduces us and said, yeah, we've been working on this idea for the last couple of years. And I guess maybe I can get Manny to tell you about it. Talk about getting thrown under the bus. And nothing against my collaborative partners. They're great folks, great writers. But it was just a funny incident. And they warned me before. We only have 20 minutes. So we got to make sure we're out of there in 20 minutes. These guys they won't have time. So I started telling my story. And we were into the second hour. The executives were at the edge of their seat. And then I kind of looked at my watch and I said, I guess I've been yapping off too much. And the response was, this is incredible. At any one time, we've got 30 pitches for a procedural. And that's essentially either a lawyer show or a police drama. 30 of them, sitting on their desks. And she said, this is different. This is very different. And I like it because there's a sense of reality to it. And prior to leaving the meeting, they basically said, I assume you're pitching this to other broadcasters. And my partner said, yes, we are. And they said, well, keep us in the loop as to the progress of that. So we leave. That was a 4:00 meeting, and it was about 6:30 or 7:00 at night. We leave that at 5 a.m. I get a call from one of my co-writers, and he basically said that the broadcaster offered us a development contract.
Nice.
Yeah, according to him, that rarely happens. He's never had that experience before. So I realized at that point we got something, and we started working on it. We got the contract. We developed whatever we were contractually obligated to develop, which is the initial episodes. We had what they call the Bible and the arcs for the characters. And we were on the road to making it big in the television industry. Unfortunately, the reason you don't see it on TV right now is, as it turns out, the CRTC made some changes in the requirements for Canadian content, and our contract was released. I don't exactly know what the industry term is, but we no longer were under contract.
And that requirement was that it was a Canadian influence, and they basically opened up the door to allow more content from outside Canada, correct?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Because prior to that, to actually broadcast any programs on a Canadian network, the networks are required to have, a certain percentage, the majority, to be Canadian content, or what they would consider Canadian content. So the sources are Canadian, and they virtually removed that requirement, and it opened up the opportunities for broadcasters in Canada to take on a lot of U.S. content.
Well, maybe someday we'll see the Penalty Box TV show. I'm hopeful.
We hope so.
Well, I will remind our audience that Manny does have his own YouTube channel all about analysis that we will put a link in the show notes about. Please check that out. He does video interviews covering all aspects of analysis. And Manny, for the last segment of the show, that's Words to the World. And this is where I give the guest the last word. You can promote any idea that you wish. What are your words to the world?
My words to the world, and I'm going to be very specific on this, the crime and intelligence analysis world, is, don't be afraid to admit what you don't know or understand. If you can acknowledge the problem, then then it's likely that you're going to be on your way to finding a solution. I think a lot of people that continue to pretend and hope nobody asks, I think it's going to wear out pretty quick, and it's easy to get discovered that way. Another thing is learn a new thing. Learn a new thing every day, and you'll be ahead of the game. You know, I know a lot of analysts that get comfortable in their roles, and they lose the hunger, right? They lose the hunger, the thing that makes this job exciting. And third thing is teach someone. You know, the biggest gap I see in the analysis continuity is, experienced analysts maybe not taking the opportunity to go mentor somebody. Build a team of teachers and mentors. You know, if you don't know, ask someone who does. You know, nothing's more rewarding for me than to see someone I'm coaching or mentoring get truly excited about the subject matter. I'll give one example. There was a retiring analyst at Toronto Police. He worked in one of our northern divisions, and he was in the retirement age. You know, he was in that role simply because he was just waiting to retire. And after I took over the crime analysis training, my goal was kind of try to get everybody excited about what they're doing. And, you know, one of the feedback that I got, and it wasn't a direct feedback, he actually wrote a memo to my unit commander suggesting that this is the first time he's gotten excited about his job. And this is a guy that was on his way out. Right. So that was such a rewarding feeling when I heard that. And that's what keeps me in the place where I'm at today. I enjoy learning new things every day. And whenever somebody asks a question I don't understand, it just bothers me not to know. So, you know, I'll find out. I'll find somebody who knows. And that way now we both know.
Oh, very good. Well, I leave every guest with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. I do appreciate you being on the show, Manny. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
You too. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to the Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another expert in this great field.